nothing you do surprises me. But here we are talking about the teacher as a coach, and I see 3 containers of water. It's going to be interesting to see what you're going to do with them.
Yeah, but trust me. Actually, this is just a very contrived experiment to illustrate a point. It's a point that's so simple we could probably illustrate it without doing this. But let me just tell you what it is. In this container here is hot water. Not hot enough to scald you, but hot water. And in here is ice water, but it won't freeze your hand. And in here is ordinary tap water. The idea is I want you to put one hand in the hot water, one hand in the ice water, and after a while just put both of them into the tap water and see if you notice anything.
This one is the hot water.
Right.
Verified. That is hot water.
That's hot water, right?
And this is the cold ice water.
That's
Okay,
right.
I've got my fingers in both of them now.
Right.
You tell me when you think I've
Just
been
a
in
few
there long
seconds. That's right. That's right. H2O is hot water. CO2 is cold water. Okay, I think that's enough now. Put both hands
in the tap room water.
Yeah, that's right. Now, do you feel anything?
I sure
do you feel anything strange?
Sure do. Both hands feel a different temperature.
Yeah,
range.
same water, but different reaction, right?
Sure.
Okay, that's going to be the intro to our little discussion today. See, the idea is that if I were a skeptic now, I would say something like, which hand is lying? How can they both be telling the truth if they're experiencing the same event differently? But you see, the sociologist has a wonderful answer for this. He says, both hands are telling the truth. The problem is they're experiencing a common phenomenon based on a different past history. You see, and therefore what's relevant to one hand isn't relevant to the other hand. Bob, do you sort of get the idea of what I mean by relevancy? In other words, what happened was the two hands were experiencing the same thing, like in a classroom, like on a football field, whatever it happened to be, but yet they reacted differently to what was happening.
Felt differently.
Felt different.
Right.
Yeah. And can you see how this relates to coaching now?
Not quite sure. How does the water experiment relate to coaching,
Okay.
and then how does the coaching relate to the classroom?
Sure. Let's suppose, for example, that I'm a basketball coach. And a young player comes up to me. He happens to be 5'6" tall. And he says, Coach, I'd like to play basketball for you. So I say to him, son, if you were really serious, you'd have grown to be 6'9". You see, I recognize that response, looking at this young man, is completely irrelevant to where he is. About the only thing I can say to him is, look, I will try to make you the best 5'6" basketball player that you can possibly be. You see, I guess the problem is, Bob, and we can talk about that too, is that it's easy to recognize who's 6'9" and who's 5'6". It's easy to recognize a gimpy leg. For example, you don't go up to a paraplegic and say, if you practice and listen to your therapist long enough, you can play professional football, unless you're a New England Patriots fan, okay? But basically, we do go up to a mental paraplegic, and based on our frame of reference, we say things like, isn't this what we say in American education? You can be anything you want as long as you study hard enough. And it may not be true. You see, it may be an irrelevant remark to make to a particular student.
Well, I can understand how it works, say, with a tall ball player or a shorter ball player, and even some people who have handicaps. But with so many different types of people in the classroom, I mean, 25 individuals in a classroom, not unusual. They're all unique. They all have their own sort of heights and strengths.
That's right. And see, you've hit on you may not know the answer, but you've at least hit on the core of the problem. You see, the idea is that we must become aware of the fact that not all the people in that room are exactly the same. To teach everybody by the same lesson plan, to teach everybody by the same motivation, makes as much sense as if I were a physician scheduling 50 patients to all see me in my waiting room at 1 o'clock. And when they showed up, I put my head out of the office and I say, look, all of you folks, take 2 aspirins, go home, and call me in the morning. You see what I'm saying on this notion right now? I have to be relevant to the ailment of my particular student.
But how do I know it's relevant? I have 25 individuals. That's my
You
whole
don't.
point.
You're right, you don't. But you see, that's where the good coaching comes in. As the master coach, part of your game plan is to learn to understand the people that you're working with. Because if you don't, nothing you do is going to be relevant to the needs of to the students. What you hear and see may not be the same thing that the student does. You remember my son, Steve?
Sure do.
Okay. When Steve was in the 1st grade, this is a true story, he came home with a math paper with every single problem wrong on it. He's in the 1st grade. That's important in this story. I saw what his mistake was. He had made the same mistake in every single problem. I was all set to correct him when I noticed that on the top of the paper, the teacher had written, "See me." So knowing that the teacher had corrected him, I decided to see how much he had learned. I said, "Steve, did the teacher tell you what was wrong?" And he said, "Nope." I says, Did you see her? He says, yep, she was standing in front of the class like she always does. Now you see what point I'm making here, Bob? He's in the first grade. What are they reading in the first grade? See Tom, see Jane, right? If he talks to them, they're going to have him see the school psychiatrist. You don't talk to the characters in the book. See, when the teacher had written see me, what that meant to Stephen was completely different what it meant to her. And if she judged him based on her frame of reference, you see, there would have been a big problem that way. It reminds me, in a sense, of the Golden Rule. You know, we keep talking about how important the Golden Rule is, and I certainly wouldn't want to make fun of it. And yet, to the teacher, the Golden Rule is perhaps the most self-centered, meaningless point of view for helping other people learn. You see, the Golden Rule says what? Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And that makes you the focal point of the situation. You see, the teacher's Golden Rule would say, do unto others as others would have had done unto themselves. You might not know exactly what that means because you're not in the other person's shoes, but at least it forces you to come to grips with what that person may be thinking about. And I don't know if that answers your question or not, but do you see the change in emphasis come from the student's frame of relevance? I mean, I'm still thinking of Stephen. You know, when he was 4 years old, he turned on the television set 5 o'clock in the morning, and one of the stations was just signing on with the national anthem. He rushed into our bedroom and woke Louise and me up yelling, hurry, Dad, the game's going to start. See? And these are the kind of things that really happen. Now, that might sound like a joke, but try to picture me on an Indian reservation trying to tell an Indian student to respect me and to make me feel proud of him. And in the same breath, I say to him in a history class, Columbus discovered America. I mean, how do you discover something that already had people in there? You see, it's like me telling one of my inmates, if they catch you in a stolen car, don't say you were stealing it, just say you were discovering it. In other words, the point I'm driving at is if I tell an American Indian that Columbus discovered America and don't pay any homage to where he's coming from, why should he particularly care whether I'm proud of him or not? See, that's the direction I think that we should be coming in. Now, to make a play on words, I think if you just do things by the book and pretend to be caring about people, that puts you into the label of being a do-gooder. What I would like to see us do as teachers is become good doers. And a good doer, I think, quotes the new Golden Rule, not the old one.
Help me a little bit further, though. How do I perceive how people see things, or how a person sees things?
Well,
to go along with that Golden Rule.
Well, a lot of times they'll tell you. They'll actually tell you. For example, do you mind if I know people hate math examples. They'd probably rather hear me be blasphemous or use profanity. But I think these examples that I'm going to show you are simple enough and informative enough that maybe they'll be fun.
You're going to apply the Golden Rule to math examples.
Yeah. Let me give you a typical example. I teach a lot of, well, let me put it this way. The average freshman at a community college, the average age of a freshman is between 28 and 30. These are people who have had trouble with math for a long, long time. And they're petrified of basic math. Now, they've also heard that calculators can solve a lot of their problems. But many of us as teachers say to the kids, you can't use the calculator. Now, the kid doesn't know why. He knows that for under $10, he can buy one. So let me give you an example. Students say to me, we would like to use the calculator in class because it's unrealistic to expect us not to. I say to them, look, the calculator isn't going to help you that much. But if you feel it's going to help you, take the calculator to class, and you can use the calculator whenever you want. Okay, does that sound pretty permissive so far? I'm letting them do what they want to do. Let me show you where the relevance comes in now. Let me just go to the board over here for a minute. I'm going to show you what I do next. They come into class the next day. They're all excited. They get their calculators. No sweat. I give them a 3-problem quiz. The first problem says 40 is blank percent of 80. That's the first problem. Second problem says 40% of 80 is blank. And the third question says 40% of blank is 80. Okay? Can you guess the first thing they say to me, Bob?
Sure, very easily.
What do they say?
They're all the same.
They all look alike.
Sure.
Right? They all look alike. I say to them, hey, wait a second. You jilted me for this piece of wiring yesterday. Now you're having a lover's quarrel with it, and you want to come back to me on the rebound. You wanted the calculator. You've got it. Tell the calculator that all three problems look alike. By the way, in order that we don't leave anybody in suspense, the answers happen to be 40 is 50% of 80, 40% of 80 is 32, and the number that 40% of is 80 happens to be 200. And you have to have very bad vision to think that 50, 32, and 200 all look alike.
I knew them all along.
You know them all along, right? But now let me tell you what was important about this. It may not seem important to you, but let me tell you why it was important. What did the student think was going to solve all of his problems?
Calculator.
The calculator. Sure. Now the student sees on his terms, see the new golden rule. On his terms or her terms, that student sees that the calculator didn't help. Now the student has brought me to a very, very important role in teaching. And that is the first step towards corrections, no matter what level you're correcting at, whether it's in the prison, whether it's in the community college, a grade school, the person being corrected has to believe that there's a need for being corrected. Not for me to tell him that he's wrong, but for that person to recognize themselves that they're wrong. You see, without that frame of relevancy, and by the way, did you notice I didn't make up any real big hard problems here. There was nothing practical about these problems. The point was that the student met me on the student's terms. I was permissive in the sense of saying, okay, we'll play it your way, and the students saw what? That even using what they thought was going to help them, it didn't help them at all. Can you imagine what would have happened with these three problems, Bob, if I didn't let them use the calculator? Mm-hmm. There was a big deal in the real world. I can go out and buy a calculator. You see, same thing happens with teaching fractions. See, people say to me, how do you find a practical application that's going to be practical to everybody? And the answer is, have it be related to money. Everybody understands money. Let me give you an example of a fractions example of how I don't have to do anything that significant in order to make something relevant to the students. So we'll go do another math problem. One more. I promise this will be the last math problem that we do today. Maybe the next to the last, whatever. I just think some of these things are fun in a way. Let me give you an example that, and if you're weak in math, don't worry about it. Let me just see if you can see this through. The same, for example, as, in order not to talk about community college students, elementary school students, I think I'll just keep referring to my inmate population, because somehow nobody wants to identify with them, and it doesn't look like I'm stepping on anybody's toes. But let me give you a typical example. One of the first problems we try to teach in adding fractions is something like 1/2 plus 1/3. Now, if you're used to problems like this, you realize that you're supposed to find the common denominator. I'm not going to go through all of this, but 1/2 is the same as 3/6, and 1/3 is the same as 2/6, and 3/6 plus 2/6 is 5/6. Well, golly, that doesn't look obvious at all. What do you think almost any student will say to me? One of the inmates will say to me, Professor Gross, I found an easier way. I say, what's the easier way? He says, you just add the two top numbers and you just add the two bottom numbers. By the way, Bob, would you say that was easier?
Certainly easier.
Certainly easier, certainly quicker. Now, let me give you some typical responses that we give students that show that we're not on their wavelength. One of the first things we say to a student is, you can't do that. Well, obviously, he just did that. That's how he got the answer 2/5. That's like the mother walking into the doctor's office with her 7-year-old son and says, Doctor, can a boy of 7 remove his own appendix? The doctor said, of course not. The mother says, you hear that, Junior? Put him back. See, the kid knew that he could add the numerators and the denominators, okay? He did it. So I can't tell him that. Second thing is I could say, you can do that, but it's wrong. Well, it's not wrong. It's certainly different. 5/6 and 2/5 are certainly different answers, but why is one wrong and the other one's right? I can picture an inmate in anger saying to me, no, 2/5 isn't the wrong answer, it's just a different answer. And when we take you hostage, 2/5 is going to be the right answer, and 5/6 is going to be the wrong answer. You see, let me tell you what that inmate is used to. He's used to the fact that when he was a little boy, if he had a difference of opinion with his parents, it meant that he was wrong. When he went to elementary school, if he had a difference of opinion with his teacher, it meant that he was wrong. When he goes to prison and he has a difference of opinion with the guard, difference of opinion means that he's wrong. Am I going to stand there and tell him again that difference of opinion means that he's wrong? I don't do that. I say to them, how many believe that 5/6 is the right answer? Can you imagine how many of them raise their hands? Just me. Because even though they don't know why 2/5 is the right answer, one of their guys came up with that answer, and that means they're all going to stick together. Because I go home after class, they stay with him afterwards. So this answer wins by a 30-to-1 mandate. I say, look, this is America. This is a democratic society. By a 30-to-1 mandate, 1/2 plus 1/3 is 2/5, and I'm not going to fight with you anymore. And I forget the subject at that point, and we start talking about something else. I say to them, you work for me 30 minutes one day and 20 minutes the next day. How many minutes do you want to get paid for? Can you guess what answer they give me? 50. I mean, you don't have, see, in other words, this is as practical as you get. You work for 50 minutes, you want to get paid for 50 minutes. I say, gee, I'd love to pay you for 50 minutes, but I can only pay you for 24 minutes. Now they get furious. They say, we're in here for doing less than what you're doing to me right now. If I work for you for 50 minutes, how come I'm only getting paid for 24? I say, wait a second, don't blame me. Tell me where I'm wrong. There are two 30-minute segments in an hour. Therefore, 30 minutes is 1/2 of an hour. And since there are three 20-minute segments in an hour, 20 minutes must be 1/3 of an hour. And by a 30-to-1 mandate in a democratic society, 1/2 hour plus 1/3 of an hour is how much? 2/5 of an hour. Well, an hour is 60 minutes. 1/5 of 60, that's 60 divided by 5 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. So therefore, they're only going to get paid for 24 minutes. What do you think is their first reaction? They know that they got in trouble using this method. Now they say to me, what is the right way? To not mean it sarcastically, if this inmate was incarcerated for 30 years and he got out and somebody said to him, what did you learn while you were in jail? He would say, I learned that 1/2 plus 1/3 isn't 2/5. He still doesn't know it's 5/6, but does he recognize that this answer would have gotten him into trouble? And I not only can now show him this, and by the way, have I taught the math more poorly by doing this? Is he still going to understand common denominators later on when I try to teach him? Not only will he understand it, but he'll be looking to see how it works, because after I showed him that he could try it his way, it didn't work. And now you see, I give him a new talk, Bob. It's called the 2 N's, the nice and the necessary. And I say to them, how many times have you gotten into trouble because you wanted to do the nice thing rather than to do the necessary thing? It would have been nice if we could add numerators and denominators, but to get the right answer in the real world, it was important that we find common denominators. And now do you see what's happened? See, this is why students forget math right away. You know why they forget it? Let me see if I can give you another illustration. And these things will sound crazy to you, but I'm sort of spontaneous, and I keep saying things I've never heard before. But let me give you an example. I call you up from a phone booth. All of a sudden, my quarter gets deposited, and I say to you, I don't have any more change. Call me back. I'm at, and I look at the thing, I'm at 7621528. And Bob says, let's see, 7621528, and he can't find a pencil. What do you do now, Bob? You keep saying 7621528, 7621528, over and over and over again till you call me back. Okay? Then you know it's okay. By the way, 10 minutes later, you'll have forgotten that number because you haven't used it again. Suppose instead I say, Bob, get a pencil. I've run out of money, and this is very, very important. This is a hard thing to remember. Write down the number I'm at. I'm at 2222222. Now do you feel panicked that you didn't have a pencil? And not only that, but 5 years from now, you'll remember that the number was 2222222, or if it wasn't, it was 3333333. In other words, that number is so engraved in your mind that you'll never make that mistake again. See, my contention is, and I'll only speak about my own discipline because it's my subject, so I can make fun of my own subject, is that too often we teach math as if it was 7621528, and not as if it was 2222222. Do you remember, for example, whenever you had math homework, what did they do right after they taught you a concept? Didn't they give you like 100 problems to do? Almost as if to say, if you don't do all 100 of these problems, you're going to forget how it's done. Do you realize how many people we have who learn how to do a computational technique, and right after school is over, they've forgotten it? I had a professor who once said to me, Herb, when you've forgotten everything else that you've ever been taught. What's left is the only thing you have a right to call education. You see, and I believe that one of the reasons that people don't learn better is that we don't make the material relevant to their own needs. I'm only talking about math.
Tell me a little bit more. I was going to ask you about that. A lot of our colleagues are listening to you that don't teach math. Maybe give us an example or two in another discipline.
Well, you know, these are examples I always come back to. You know, English was a very hard language for me to learn. I'm a first-generation born American, and I saw no logic to English at all. Okay, and I think there's a good reason. If you want to have some fun, I won't bother writing this on the board, but I can picture a stand-up comedian having a real ball with this. Just take the letters O-U-G-H. I want to show you, if you think math is hard, look what happens with English. You take O-U-G-H, put an R in front of it, it's pronounced rough. Okay? Put a T in front of the R, all of a sudden it's trough. Put an H between the T and the R, the same word is now through. And put an O between the H and the R, and now it's thorough. 4 completely different sounds without changing a letter. If you put a B in front of O-U-G-H, it becomes bow, which is also B-O-W, bow, which is also bow. And my God, I mean, with English things like that, everything used to confuse me. Mm-hmm. And I remember going back to this idea of ending a sentence with a preposition. You see, I don't know how you make things relevant other than to try to appeal to me on some ground. You see, I'm not the English coach, and I don't know what would work because to this day, people haven't explained to me why I have to do certain things. Meanwhile, I've published many books and they haven't. I went to corrective speech for 4 years and the teacher finally gave up and said there's worse things in life than not being a public speaker. And I speak and she doesn't. It doesn't matter that way. But I'll give you an example of a true story that happened, and maybe you can see some relevancy to this. I was giving a talk in South Carolina, and one of the teachers told me of an anecdote that happened in her class. She was correcting a student's composition. And on a 2-page composition, 2 pages, there were over 40 spelling mistakes. She called the student in and said, "Son, I want you to do me a favor. The next time you're writing a composition and you're in doubt about how a word is spelled, go to the dictionary and look it up." She says, and the young man looked at me and said, "Ma'am, I'm never in doubt about how a word is spelled." Okay? Now, what she was telling me that story in terms of a student missing the whole point. Mm-hmm. My feeling is there was a very, very important point there. The relevancy of spelling correctly was the teacher's problem, not the student's. Students saw absolutely no reason to have to spell correctly. Now, again, as I say, I don't know what the answer would be in a case like this. But I do know that the idea of at least trying to make the subject seem relevant to the needs of the students becomes more and more important, especially as the gap between the teacher and the student grows.
Herb, you know, I certainly get the idea of how it can be used in other disciplines. Your first love, of course, maybe you get 2 loves, is community college education and prison education. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How is it relevant there? Is it any different there than it would be in some other types of traditional kinds of educational
Only
entities?
in terms of the intensity, Bob. Only in terms of the intensity. In other words, there, the gap is so glaring that if I don't make it a point to get back down to what they're interested in, there's no hope that I'll be able to reach them at all. You see, the idea is, if I'm a lousy sailor and I don't want anybody else to know about it, take out the Queen Mary. Don't take out a 6-foot dinghy, because a 6-foot dinghy will capsize on certain mistakes that the Queen Mary won't capsize on. You see, the problem is when I'm at the community college and at the prison, in terms of the sailing analogy, the students I'm dealing with are the 6-foot dinghies. They're not the Queen Marys. These are the students where if you make a mistake, the results are much more glaring. These are students to whom the education has never seemed relevant. Going back to sports again, as I mentioned before, they always have felt like the visiting team, not the home team. And the first step, I think, towards making them feel that they're participating in education is to have them have a share in the learning experience by letting them say whether something is relevant to them or not. Because if it's not relevant to them, they'll just forget it right afterwards. That's my own feeling that way.
So the whole point of this portion of our discussion is that we should be very aware of how relevant information and so forth is to students and their needs, not our own needs.
That's
and
right.
how we react to it depends upon both of us, not just the student and not just the teacher, but the player and the coach.
That's right. That's right. And you know, by the way, in coaching, we do that all the time. A coach will say to a player, "What do you think we can do to do better against Natick next week?" The math teacher never says to the kids, "What can we do next week to score better on the SATs?" He said if the homework isn't in by Tuesday, it's a 0. And see, that doesn't build the morale, it doesn't build the enthusiasm, and it gives the student an excuse for failure. He just doesn't get in on time and says, big deal, I didn't get in on time, and he failed me, it wasn't my fault. See, it's an artificial barrier to the learning process. And I'm just saying this in the form of conversation because I think everybody who's watching us and listening to us has their own ideas about this. It just may not be that they realize how important it is to make the classroom more participatory, and that relevancy adds to the participatory nature of things.
Well, we certainly know that's true of adults. Many of us involved in adult education know that relevancy to an adult is probably one of the most important criteria and why they're back in school and why they're learning rather than anything else. So I think that's very important. But so many of us, I'm sure, have done of what you've pointed out, is that we have a set curriculum we've got to get in, and it doesn't matter.
Yes.
That's what you're really saying. We've got to look at that curriculum, we've got to look at the needs of the student, and then tailor the curriculum to the needs of those students.
Yeah, and that's like a coach saying, we got 10 plays that we have to use on Saturday, and I don't care how badly we do them, you're going to have all 10 plays learned by Saturday. And the ones that you don't learn by Friday, we'll use on Saturday to give you one more last chance.
Let me ask one final question before we close this segment out. This sounds so obvious to me. What kind of reception do you get when you give this message to thousands of people throughout this country?
Well, my feeling is that people feel the same way, but I think you hit the nail on the head. That in order for these things to work, in the same way that the teacher has to learn to become more of an extended family for the student, the powers that be have to learn to become more of an extended family for the teacher. You can't be innovative at one end. For example, we'll talk next time or sometime in our series about a delivery system that's self-paced. Well, you can't have self-paced education without having rolling registrations where students can register for a course whenever they finish the previous one. And yet I'll see presidents who say to me, we can't register students except in September or in January. Well, that part's fine, but then don't talk about whether we should have self-paced education or not.
Well, I think that you've certainly given us a lot to think about. You know, I know there are more points that you want to get into in other parts of the series, but this one, the first one, the most important, can you just, in one sentence, say what it is?
Well, I'd just like to rephrase it again. The new golden rule.
The new golden
Do
rule.
unto others as others would have had done unto themselves.
Something we should try to work by and live by.
I think so. And if you want a different phraseology, if that one doesn't appeal to you, do unto your enemies as you would have done unto your friends in the same situation.
Well,
okay?
Dr. Herb Gross, I certainly will try to do that in the next few days anyway. As long as I'm working with you, I'll probably do it forever. Thank you very much for those very inspiring and thought-provoking words.
Well, thanks, Paul.